Welcome everyone, this is Honest Restart, and this time we're talking about when Nintendo may be discontinuing the Nintendo Switch. Now, this isn't a video talking about some news that just occurred where Nintendo announced that, hey, we're discontinuing the Nintendo Switch. No, not so much. But if anything, perhaps the inciting incident for my inspiration or what have you for making this video is because we have been seeing that 3DS merchandise and games and such have been really skyrocketing in price. Why? Because they're no longer available, because the 3DS has been discontinued and it's now becoming a rarity, something that is sought after because it's limited in quantity because Nintendo is making no more of it. And it was also pretty good, so those factors combine to something that can skyrocket in price on different marketplaces. But anyway, the Switch is incredibly successful. For many, it is their favorite system. It is my favorite system, perhaps even of all time. It is getting to that kind of level of quality and success. There are so many great games, the sales are so strong, everyone has it. It's something you can kind of talk about with pretty much anyone. And it's not just like a lightning in a bottle situation like the Wii, where they captured a really large market that would only last for a little bit. No, this is the kind of market that will go on for a long time. It's basically gamers that like games and playing them mobilely, or like playing Nintendo games or other cool things. It's just an exciting time right now to be a Nintendo fan or a Switch fan, but there have been murmurings of a next generation on the horizon, and eventually this generation will end, and some people are concerned. When will that be? Will that be sooner than later? With all the rumors circulating about a Switch Pro and a Switch 2 and a Super Switch or what have you, people are growing somewhat concerned. Could this amazing time end sooner than we expect? I don't think so. I don't think that should be a real fear here, but still the question remains, when will Nintendo discontinue the Switch? When will we have to move on? That's what we're talking about today. Now, before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe or perhaps even consider joining as a member. So to tackle this question, I think the first thing we should cover is the murmurings or rumors of a next generation piece of hardware that will be the successor for the Nintendo Switch. What will Nintendo eventually replace the Switch with? And I think that's going to be basically what the Switch is already, just a better version of it. I think Nintendo has struck gold with this formula, and I think they would be foolish to shy away from it or to go in a different direction. Can they improve upon it, try something interesting and new? Sure. But I think the core experience of the Switch, that hybrid mentality, those Joy-Cons, I think all of that should be improved upon, and if they can put something else in there to make it interesting, go for it. But still, ultimately, that relatively cheap price point, that hybrid factor, the multitude of indie games and Nintendo games and some third-party stuff, all of that needs to stick around, because that's what's made them so successful. So whatever it is they do, it's going to be hardware that will translate relatively well, and I do believe Nintendo's going to be very careful about their transition here, because they don't want to lose the momentum they have. I think we're in a situation where Nintendo's not going to let the Switch have like a terrible year where there's barely any games, it's a huge drought, and it's very clear that the next generation is about a year away. It's not going to be like that. More likely at this point, I would say, there's going to be good games coming out throughout the Switch's generation, and eventually Nintendo will transition over to a new piece of hardware, and they will coexist together for a couple years or so. But we'll talk more about that coexistence in a bit. I first want to talk about the rumors of a next generation piece of hardware, because we've been talking about Switch Pro for so long. At this point, I do not think Switch Pro is happening. I think perhaps there is some information conflated with Switch OLED, perhaps plans changed and they were simply pushed over to next generation. There are a number of things that were occurring, like the pandemic and then the chip shortage supply, so there's been so many different things that have caused probably fluctuations behind the scenes. So regardless, I don't think a Switch Pro is coming. That's a mid-gen refresh. I think we're past that point already. But instead, what I think we're getting in the not-so-distant future is a next-generation piece of hardware. And we have some proof of that from the recent NVIDIA leak. Within that leak, there were a number of things shown off, including a more powerful piece of hardware that is related to the Switch. The strong implication here is that it's a next generation system of the Nintendo Switch. It's far too powerful or improved upon to be just the next basic Switch revision. It's something bigger than that. And considering that a lot of industry analysts are predicting that the next generation Switch could be coming out as early as the beginning of 2024, there could be something to that. Now, they could just be predicting that, but I also don't think that's too far off. I wouldn't even be surprised if we see a next generation Switch as early as the end of 2023, but we'll get to that in a little bit later into the video. Point is, we have proof that next generation hardware is being put together here, and it does seem like we are getting closer and closer to that. That said, I don't think the Switch is going to just die off immediately. In fact, we're seeing some incredible support from Nintendo. 2022 is looking to be one of the best years ever for Switch when it comes to big quality releases from Nintendo. This first half of the year has been pretty good. Pokemon Legends Arceus in January, looking to be one of the best-selling Pokemon games ever. Triangle Strategy and Kirby and the Forgotten Land this month, both games reviewing incredibly well. And then in April, we're getting Nintendo Switch Sports, which I think could be an incredible success. It is a true successor to Wii Sports, which was a pretty good thing back in the day. I'm not saying it'll be as successful because it's not going to be a packing game for the Switch, but I think it has some serious potential there. Advance Wars was delayed, but maybe it comes out before summer or close to that point. And then in summer, we're getting Mario Strikers, the Sunbreak expansion to Monster Hunter Rise, we're getting Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, and Splatoon 3 is due out in the summer, and then the second half of the year we're getting Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Breath of the Wild 2 supposedly, Mario + Rabbids Sparks of Hope, Bayonetta 3, and a brand new fully open world Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. There is a lot there, and that's just the confirmed things. There will be more. So it's looking to be a very, very strong year. So you can look at that in two different ways. You could argue, well, this is the final big year, and the next year is going to be like nothing, and then we get the next generation hardware at the end of the year. Possibly. But you can also think of it in a different way. We're getting a brand new Splatoon 3, which will be supported for some time. Splatoon games get recurring DLC coming out frequently for a bit of a while after its initial release. You could argue only half the game really comes out at launch, and the other half comes out in the year or so after its release. So Splatoon 3 is going to have some legs, and that alone sort of means that Switch is going to be relevant for a while afterwards. And then Breath of the Wild 2 is certainly going to be a big deal as well. Nintendo's been working on this for many, many years at this point. They're not going to just put this out in a system and just move on to the next one, will they? There's got to be something more to that. And then Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, it's a new generation of Pokemon and the most ambitious one yet. So there are some games here that are going to be supported for a while. So I don't think it means that Nintendo's moving quickly onto the next system, or if they are, there's going to be a lot of crossover here in terms of games and their relevancy and working on both platforms. But there are other things to consider here in terms of software, because we also know we're going to be getting Mario Kart 8 Deluxe DLC all the way up until the end of 2023 potentially. So with that in mind, that means that we're not getting a brand new main platform Mario Kart game in 2023 or this year for that matter. Like, that's just not going to happen. It's probably going to be a bit of time after the release of all the DLC. Maybe a year, maybe 2 years, maybe more. But something we do know is that typically brand new Mario Kart games come out early on into a system's life cycle. Now perhaps Nintendo will repackage Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with the DLC again for the next generation system. Hard to say what they're doing there, but the point is, it doesn't seem likely that a new Mario Kart is coming out immediately. So we're not entirely sure if that means that the next generation is coming really soon. They're probably going to continue to milk the massive success for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the Nintendo Switch. And continuing this conversation about major games that tend to coincide with the beginning of new generations, what about Breath of the Wild 2? That's supposed to come out at the end of this year. Now, people are speculating that perhaps the game will be delayed for a Switch Pro or a next generation system, but I personally don't think Nintendo's going to delay Breath of the Wild 2. If they were going to delay it beyond this year, I think we would have known about that already. Of course, stranger things have happened, so we'll see, but assuming everything holds true, the game's going to come out at the end of this year. And that's a major Zelda game. Typically, we see major Zelda games either in the middle of a console generation or they come out to push a system. And there is no apparent system coming out this year, So we're probably a bit of a ways off, and it doesn't look like we're going to have another major Zelda to push a new piece of hardware anytime soon, because it does take a while to make these games. So if Mario Kart 10 or whatever is looking to be a few years off, and the next big new Zelda after Breath of the Wild 2 is probably going to take a while as well, what does Nintendo have that typically is there around the beginning of a new generation? Well, what about 3D Mario? The last time we got 3D Mario, a brand new one from the ground up altogether, was Mario Odyssey in 2017. Now we did get 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, and Bowser's Fury was a bit of a mini new campaign, but it wasn't a full-on new game, and it was built off of the assets from 3D World. So I think there's plenty of reason to think that the next big 3D Mario, the successor of Mario Odyssey, should be deep into development, and they're probably prepping that for the next big new hardware. And considering that the Mario movie is coming out at the end of this year, it wouldn't shock me if the following holiday 2023, we see a next generation system alongside a brand new 3D Mario. That would match up to the way Nintendo has handled things in the past, or at least similarly. And another series to consider here is Smash Bros. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate finished entirely last year. We're probably not going to get another Smash Bros. Anytime soon. That game has just way too much content. It was supported for a few years, and it's going to be hard to follow that up, and Sakurai likely wants a break. Perhaps he's done entirely with Smash Bros. So it's going to take Nintendo quite some time before they come out with a new Smash. Now, could they perhaps do like a complete edition with a few more little additions of Smash Ultimate, a Smash Ultimate Deluxe a few years from now for a new piece of hardware that would be Switch 2 or what have you? Yeah, that's possible. Maybe we could see that also at the end of 2023 or in 2024 a little bit later. But the point is here, besides Mario, it doesn't look like we have another big game that's ready to come out that would typically be used to push new hardware early on. The ultimate point I'm trying to make here is that for the most part, it doesn't look like the Switch is really going anywhere. Nintendo has told us that they want the Switch to have a longer lifespan than previous systems, beyond the typical 5 to 6 year lifespan. And we also know that the Switch is still selling about 20 million units per year. It's still basically close to its peak, so it's not really showing any real serious signs of decline. Nintendo's yet to have any sort of price drop for the system, and we're already past the 5-year mark of the system, so things are going really strong right now. Nintendo has no real logical reason to end things anytime soon, so I think they're going to be holding to that expectation of keeping the life cycle going much longer than previous generations. But on that note, we did start hearing that Nintendo was telling us that we were about through the midway point of the Switch's lifespan as early as holiday 2020, and they've been saying that since, so they haven't changed that sort of verbiage. They're still saying that we're about halfway through during all their different financial briefings since then. So maybe we are about halfway through. Now, it's clear that that halfway point is clearly arranged here. It's not just December 2020 or June 2021 or March 2022. Like, there's a window here, right? There's a lot of vaguity there. Not entirely sure what's the exact actual midway point of the Switch's generation. We don't know. That's the point of this video, trying to figure out when Nintendo will be done with the Switch entirely. One thing we can sort of look to though for comparison though is how Nintendo handled the Nintendo 3DS. So the Nintendo 3DS came out early 2011 and it was entirely discontinued in the latter half of 2020. So it was around and at least somewhat relevant for about 9.5 years, nearly a decade. Now, it's important to sort of clarify here, that doesn't mean that a whole bunch of major games are coming out on the 3DS throughout this entire time. The 3DS was Nintendo's basically their main piece of hardware and their primary breadwinner from when it came out all the way up until, let's say, early 2017 when the Switch came out. But it still was in production for a few more years. So let's sort of compare here. The 3DS came out early 2011, 6 years later, the Switch came out early 2017. 2017 was basically the last sort of significant year in terms of quality releases and consistent releases on the 3DS. So does that perhaps suggest that 2023 will be a similar year for Nintendo Switch, that last year for significant quality releases? Perhaps, or maybe it's delayed a year because of the pandemic and all. And then a couple years later, the 3DS stopped receiving any sort of published games from Nintendo. 2019 was the last year we saw that. So again, does that perhaps suggest that 2025 or 2026 is when we start to see the last published games for the Nintendo Switch? It's possible, and from what I just suggested, maybe you realize I am in sort of implying here that perhaps by 2023 or 2024, we see the release of the next generation system of the Switch, but still for a couple more years, 2 to 3 years, we will still be seeing Switches out on the market to be purchased, and there will still be some games coming out then. So even if Switch 2 comes out next year or the year after, the Switch will still be out on the market available for purchase with some games coming out during that time. So if you have a concern of your recent Switch purchase becoming irrelevant, you have quite some time before that's the case. And another thing to consider here, especially based off the Nvidia leak, it's looking like Nintendo is for sure going to be maintaining the similar style of the Switch. So whatever it is, it's going to be something similar, and perhaps it will be an easy transition. Perhaps it'll be backwards compatible, maybe it'll be forwards compatible, maybe the same sort of style of online account will transition over, perhaps even your purchases on the eShop. This is all conjecture, we do not know, and I'm sure that it will at least improve upon things moving forward, but there's a strong possibility that a lot of things you have for your Switch will translate over. So even if you invested in Switch now and you feel like you'll be burned because Nintendo's going to come out with a next generation system at the end of 2023, it's not going to be all lost because the Switch will still be relevant, getting new games for a few years afterwards most likely, and maybe a lot of things you have on Switch will translate over to Switch 2. So ultimately, my guess is that we'll see the next generation hardware at the end of 2023 at the earliest, potentially sometime in 2024. That's pretty much my range. Holiday 2023 to holiday 2024, sometime in that window. But even then, the Switch will still be getting new games and still be out on the market for purchase for 2 to 3 more years after that point. More likely closer to 3 years, I would say. Nintendo just needs to support this system because it's doing so well. It just makes sense to do that. And I think we're going to have plenty of time to still enjoy our Nintendo Switch, but also Nintendo will be doing their best to translate that over to Switch 2 so we can continue to enjoy this golden age of Nintendo where everything is pretty much great in terms of their games and their hardware. Anyways, that's all for now. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. This is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.